I go by the name of Hank. Please don't call me Henry. It just makes me angry when someone does. I was sweating as I faced the jury and began my opening argument. I couldn't afford an attorney, so I represented myself. Was I nervous? Hell no, I was scared to death. I was facing 5 years in prison for assault and battery, and if I messed up defending myself in my criminal trial, I could end up in jail for a long time. My wife, Zelda, sat in the audience, holding hands with her lover and glaring at me, hoping her testimony would push me out of her life and into prison. It was a dark and stormy night, just like in that Gothic novel I once read when I met Zelda about 20 years ago. Perhaps that novel's beginning should have warned me to stay away from her, but she was so stunning and I was so lonely that I couldn't resist. Zelda drove her car, a beautiful fire engine red, but I couldn't take my eyes off her. Her jet black hair contrasted beautifully with the color of the car. Unfortunately, I was thwarted in my attempts to admire her by the large coat she wore, as even in Los Angeles, evenings can be chilly. Her car kept stalling and eventually wouldn't start at all. It was Friday at 5 p.m., and I still couldn't figure out what was wrong. Zelda, or Zaja as she preferred to be called, was supposed to drive from Los Angeles to San Francisco that night for her father's funeral the next day, and then race back for a final exam at UCLA. Her luggage was already packed in the hatchback. I promised her I would fix her car if it took me all night, as I knew she was in no mood for chit-chat. With all the other mechanics gone, I needed Zaja to hold a flashlight on the fuse box while I shimmed under the car. I went back and forth, checking the electrical schematics and the fuse box, removing, cleaning, and replacing each fuse. By 8 p.m., I found the cracked clip that wasn't making contact because of a nearly invisible loose wire. After fixing it, electricity flowed through the car once again, and as I looked at Zaja, I felt a spark of connection. She began to cry, distressed about missing her father's funeral and hating the thought of driving at night, especially in the rain. I hugged her and told her to let it all out, and she sank into my arms. I was surprised by how comfortable she felt with me. Just 2 days earlier, my girlfriend and I were at a dance club when a tall, muscular man attempted to pull her away to dance without asking my permission. I ordered him to let go of her, but he forcefully removed my hand from hers. When he laughed at me and asked what I was going to do about it, I kicked him hard in the shin with my steel-toed boot. My girlfriend ended up following him to apologize, calling me a grease monkey with no future before leaving with him. I won't tolerate disrespect from anyone. While I don't seek out fights, I also won't back down from one. I didn't want to return to my lonely apartment filled with old memories that night. I had initially planned to go to a bar and get drunk, but then I realized it might be best that my girlfriend had broken up with me. With nothing holding me back, I felt drawn to start a new relationship with Zaja. I gently stroked her hair and suggested that if she could arrange a place for me to stay in San Francisco, I would drive her up and back after the funeral. It was impulsive, but that was the story of my life. I rarely thought things through. I called my mother to pack a bag for me with a suit and a thermos of coffee while Zaja phoned her mother to arrange for me to stay in their guest room. We left the garage, picked up my clothes, and took I-5 north. I guess my conversation wasn't that exciting because 10 minutes later, as we crested the hill, Zaja was sound asleep, leaning against me. Being this close to a beautiful woman helped me forget the bad breakup I had just endured. About 6 hours later, as we crossed the Golden Gate Bridge into Marin, I had to wake Zaja to get directions to her house. She opened her eyes and asked if it was her turn to drive. As she looked around and realized we had driven all night, she directed me to her family's home. When we arrived, Zaja rang the doorbell. Her mother was wide awake, unable to sleep after her husband's death. They embraced warmly, and then her mother hugged me, thanking me for being the knight who rescued her daughter in her hour of need. Her mother had an open bottle of scotch on the table, and Zaja took out 2 glasses from the pantry. I settled onto a comfortable couch, knowing I wasn't much of a drinker. 1 drink after a long day of work and a 6-hour drive was enough to knock me out. A few hours later, as a hint of sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows despite the rain clouds, I woke up on the couch, covered by several blankets. At the funeral, I held a large umbrella over Zaja and her mother. They both kept their arms around my waist to stay sheltered, and taking care of these two grieving women gave me a wonderful feeling of satisfaction. I admit it, I like taking care of people. I learned that from my father. He taught me that you don't judge a man by his income or toughness, but by how he cares for those who are important to him. After the funeral, I met her extended family, and most of them thought, based on our interactions, that we'd been together for a while, and said we made a lovely couple. Zaja took my arm and explained that every girl dreams of finding her hero, and I was hers. The next semester, she moved out of the UCLA dorm and into my apartment. A year later, we married. My boss at the garage was so impressed by how I fixed Zaja's car and then drove her to San Francisco that he put the story in a newspaper ad to showcase what a caring garage he ran. I even got a raise out of it. Zaja got a job as a mortgage broker. She earned a lot of money but didn't enjoy the work. She confessed to me that despite her protests, her boss was constantly flirting with her and had become inappropriate. This announcement further solidified my faith in her loyalty. I suggested two solutions. She could quit, or I could visit her office to teach her boss some manners. She chose to quit the next day and became a real estate salesperson. Her intelligence, looks, bubbly personality, and endless ambition made her a top salesperson within 8 months. I moved from the Datsun shop to a Ferrari shop. Those cars were temperamental, but I seemed to possess the magic to fix them, earning as much money as a car mechanic could possibly make, more than most teachers and many lawyers. We were careful with our money and saved as much as we could to buy a house. When my wife took time off to have babies, we could live comfortably on my income alone. I could have started my own shop and made even more money, but I didn't want the administrative hassle that would take me away from my family. I loved working on cars so much that my wife claimed I didn't have a job. I had a well-paying hobby. About once a month, my boss and I would buy an old Ferrari, restore it, sell it for a fortune, and split the profits. All the money I earned from this side hustle went into a bank account for our kids' college funds. As much as I loved my job, I loved my kids more, so I limited my overtime to ensure I rarely missed dinner with my family. My major failure in life was trying to teach my daughters the basics of how a car worked and how to fix one. The thought of getting grease on their polished fingernails horrified them. I wasn't angry. They were just girly girls. In return, they failed to teach me how to match my shirt to my pants. We had a loving, symbiotic relationship. I fixed their cars, and they chose my outfits each day. My wife and I worked out in the gym we built in our garage, and we were both in great shape for a couple in their 40s. Though I must admit that my hairline wasn't what it used to be, I refused to use a comb-over to hide it. I was content, but my wife said she was getting bored with our lives and wanted some excitement. So for our wedding anniversary, I took her on a second honeymoon to Hawaii, which was really our first honeymoon. When we married, all I could afford was a weekend at a cheesy motel in Malibu, where we stayed for several days while all the other rooms changed occupants every couple of hours. The vacation package to Hawaii included a hula dancing lesson for Zaja. I had planned for the two of us to spend hours at the beach, sipping margaritas, swimming, and soaking up the sun, but things changed after her hula lesson. Every man in the group seemed captivated by her, and she enjoyed the attention. When one man reached out, trying to get too close, I intervened, firmly taking his hands before he could touch her. After that encounter, we returned to our room, where we connected deeply for the rest of the trip, cherishing our time together, even if I didn't see much of Hawaii beyond what was visible from our bed. I thought we were both happy. However, when we returned home, my wife's desire for expensive cosmetic surgery began to surface. Despite thinking she looked great as she was, her tears prompted me to open my wallet for her needs. Zaja immersed herself in her work, earning twice the income, but also working twice the hours. She rarely joined our family for dinner more than once a week. I took on the role of cooking, driving our girls to school, and cheering them on at their soccer and tennis games. My absentee wife often dismissed our children's feelings when they expressed their disappointment, calling them ungrateful. They came to me for support, but I had no magic words to ease their pain. When my wife asked me to explain the importance of her work to our daughters, I admitted that I understood their perspective. This led to an argument, and she stormed out, returning home late that night, smelling of scotch. One evening, while my daughters and I were enjoying our usual TV time, Zaja walked in, tears of pride in her eyes, holding a trophy for being the top agent among her employers. She placed it above the fireplace, displacing a family photo. I couldn't help but feel that she had traded our family time for that trophy. Our marriage began to decline from there. Each night, she returned from cocktail hour with her colleagues, rushing to shower without acknowledging me. I could sense something was off, especially with the faint scent of another man's cologne lingering in the air. Her phone was locked and guarded, providing no clues to her activities. It became evident to our daughters and me that Zaja was likely having an affair. I informed my daughters that I was planning to divorce their mother. They pleaded with me to wait until after their high school graduation, aware of how a contentious divorce could impact their futures. I promised I would hold off, putting their needs first, even if it meant enduring my wife's behavior for a while longer. Deep down, I still hoped we could repair our marriage, despite knowing the odds were slim. Zaja primarily returned home for clean clothes. I didn't directly confront her about the affair. Instead, I warned her that if her behavior continued, she would risk losing her family. To my surprise, she didn't respond, seemingly indifferent to my concerns. A customer at the Ferrari shop, a successful tech entrepreneur, offered to help me with my suspicions. He suggested using technology to monitor Zaja, but I struggled to grasp the technical details he provided. I felt overwhelmed and out of my depth, realizing I was more comfortable with engines and transmissions than with high-tech gadgets. One day, as I drove past my wife's office, I noticed a Christmas party taking place. Most of the attendees were with their spouses, but Zaja hadn't invited me. When I entered, I was devastated to see her with a tall, muscular man. That's when it all hit the fan. And that's why I'm in court today in front of a jury facing felony charges for assault and battery. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm Hank Cynic. I'm a 45-year-old blue-collar car mechanic struggling to keep working due to arthritis. I learned that my wife's company was having a Christmas party, which she had kept a secret from me. I thought I would surprise her, but she wasn't the one in for a surprise. My wife is 40 years old and has a master's degree in psychology, which I might add I paid for, and her boyfriend is 30. I'm not a lawyer. My only legal education has been watching Law and Order for 25 years. I'm representing myself because I can't afford a lawyer. In 20 years, I had saved $887,000 in a trust account for my daughter's college tuition. I asked my daughters to stand up in the audience and blew them a kiss, which they returned. I noticed that most of the jurors smiled as I did. When I walked into the party of my wife's office, I pointed to Cody. He approached me and ordered me to leave, belittling me by calling me Little Henry. He claimed he was now the one in her life and referred to me as a useless old fool. He bragged that my daughters wouldn't be going to college because my wife had taken all the money. Cody told me she bought him a Porsche with it, which led to my alleged confrontation with him. Cody claims I broke his nose and knocked out 4 of his teeth. Now, if that's true, it may be against the laws of man, but you have to ask yourselves if it's against the laws of nature. If a young man like him can go around seducing the wives of older men and taking the money their husbands worked hard for without fear of reprisal, then no one's marriage is safe. So if these allegations are true, I didn't just defend my marriage. I defended all marriages everywhere, including those of each of you jurors seated before me. One juror, a man in his 60s, pointed out the lack of a wedding ring on his finger and winked at me. If just one juror refuses to vote guilty, Then there is a hung jury and a mistrial. I felt like I had just guaranteed myself a hung jury. At worst, the prosecutor had anticipated my plan of attack and explained that we can't condone vigilant justice in a civilized society. There is never an excuse for it. This situation should be left to the divorce courts. But I knew that's not where a husband who is a victim of infidelity can find justice. My brother's wife cheated on him, and the court rewarded her and her boyfriend with the family home and 10 years of alimony. Why do the courts encourage this behavior? My first witness was my daughter, Michelle. She testified that she was a senior in high school with a 3.9 average. Michelle had received early admission to Stanford University, but because her mother took the money I had saved for her tuition, she could only afford a local community college. As she left the witness stand in tears, she hugged me and loudly declared for the jury that I was the best father in the world and that she loved me. One woman juror cried. My second witness was my daughter Stephanie. She testified that her mother ignored the family, and that, although I had planned to divorce my wife months ago, I didn't because she and her sister begged me to wait until after they graduated high school. No matter how badly my wife treated us, that made a solid impression on the jury. She pointed to her mother and shouted that her mother should be the one on trial. The judge didn't even wait for the assistant DA to object before ordering the jury to disregard my daughter's outburst. The prosecution called my wife as their first witness. She testified that I assaulted her boyfriend at the Christmas party, but I never touched her. On cross-examination, I asked her who paid for her master's degree. She admitted that I did. I then asked who paid for her cosmetic surgery last year when she insisted on it. And again, she admitted that I did, beginning her affairs soon after. I pressed for how long she had been involved with her younger boyfriend, but the judge sustained the DA's objection. I continued, asking if she withdrew all our money and mortgaged our house so I couldn't pay for a divorce lawyer. The assistant DA objected, saying it was 2 questions, but she admitted to both individually. When I asked who forged my name on the loan documents, she pleaded the Fifth Amendment. She did, however, acknowledge that her boyfriend had bragged about it to me right before the alleged incident. I asked how she intended to pay for our children's college education, but she didn't answer. I asked if her boyfriend's desire for a Porsche was more important to her than our children's future. Our daughters, who were in the audience, stood up and shouted that she was a thief who stole their college money, and that they never wanted to see her again. The judge had them removed from the courtroom, but the effect on my wife was devastating. The impact on the jury was crucial to my case. The assistant DA objected, and it was sustained, but the jury saw what they saw and heard what they heard. My next witness was my wife's office manager, a bitter, thrice-divorced woman in her 30s. Each of her divorces was due to her infidelity. She testified that my wife bragged about her young lover for 6 months, claiming I was just a grease monkey too stupid to ever figure it out. She said my wife made no effort to keep the affair secret and reveled in treating me like a fool. The office manager admitted that she and others in management encouraged the affair because Cody was much more presentable to clients than a lowly car mechanic who always had grease under his fingernails. When Cody walked to the stand, it was apparent he towered over me. I stood at 5 feet 9 inches, while he was at least 6 feet 3 inches. I wanted the jury to see the height difference. I wasn't picking a fight with someone half my size, but rather with someone much bigger. I asked him to place his left hand on the Bible, and when he struggled to do so, I removed the gold Rolex watch from his wrist. Your Honor, I wish to enter this into evidence. Would you read the inscription on the back? The judge removed her glasses and read aloud. To our grandson, Hank Cynic. When did you take my watch? I asked. I didn't take it, Cody replied. Your wife gave it to me. He thought belittling me in front of the jury was a good idea, but I pressed on. So you're saying that my wife stole it? Well, I didn't, so give it back to me. The judge, a mature woman, handed the watch back to me instead of to Cody. Your Honor, I believe the witness has just admitted to conspiracy to steal my $110,000 watch and receiving stolen goods. Can you instruct the assistant district attorney to file charges against Cody and my wife for this theft and the theft of my daughter's college funds? I then asked Cody how much money my wife had given him. He said he didn't know. I explained that I had the canceled checks and that he admitted she had given him over $125,000. What services did you provide to her to merit such a large sum? He didn't answer, so I supplied an answer. Are you that skilled to deserve $125,000? The response was a smile as he said, Your wife thinks so. According to her, I'm a lot better than you. I noted that this didn't earn him any favor with the jury. By the end of his testimony, I sensed that most of the men and half of the women on the jury wanted to confront him. I remained calm despite his repeated taunts. My father once taught me not to interrupt an opponent who was intent on making a fool of himself. When I asked him, How many other married women have you been involved with? He answered none, but the assistant DA objected. Your Honor, may I leave the courtroom for a moment to bring in some witnesses? The judge agreed. I returned with 3 women and 4 children. I'm going to ask that question again. How many married women have you slept with? The assistant DA shouted an objection, but I pressed on. I'm asking again to prove that the witness is lying. The judge overruled the objection. 5, he admitted. How many families have been affected because of you? He fell silent. I know of at least 4 children who now live in broken homes because of you. After your encounters with married women, do you think you'll try to seduce any more? Hell no, he quickly replied. So this has been a positive learning experience for you, preventing more broken homes and devastated children. I turned to the jury. I would call that a service to the community. Do you recognize the 4 men in the front row? No, Cody said emphatically. One of the men was hitting his palm with his other fist, while another pretended to cut his own throat with his finger. Well, they are the divorced husbands of some of the women you had affairs with. Is there anything you'd like to say to them? Perhaps an apology? At that point, the assistant DA objected, which was sustained. Remember their faces. You may see them again. Who knows? Maybe even in a dark alley. The prosecutor called an emergency room doctor to testify about the injuries inflicted on Cody. During cross-examination, I asked if he was married. When he confirmed he was, I inquired whether he felt any sympathy for the victim now that he knew all the facts. None whatsoever, he replied. Next, the prosecutor called an occupational therapist who claimed that Cody was so injured he couldn't work, and I was responsible for his lost income. In cross-examination, I asked the therapist what kind of work Cody did. When he said he didn't know, I pressed, How can you testify under oath that he can't perform his job if you don't even know what it is? The therapist fell silent. Can Cody still be intimate? I asked. The doctor responded affirmatively. Well, since Cody made $125,000 as a male escort, in your medical opinion, can he continue to engage with married women who have children? The prosecutor objected, and the judge sustained it, but not before the jury chuckled. My strategy was clear. If I could make the jury laugh, they would be less inclined to convict me. I wanted them to see me not as a violent bully, but as a wronged husband seeking justice. Then I called my surprise witness. I felt like Perry Mason. His name was Eddie Cochran, who had contacted me after seeing my story on the evening news. The assistant DA nearly spat out the water he was drinking. He objected, claiming my witness's testimony was irrelevant. I asked how he could know that before hearing it. The judge temporarily dismissed the jury while she heard Cochran's testimony. Mr. Cochran, have you and the assistant DA ever met before today? Yes, he replied. 3 years ago, I was in a relationship with his wife. He came to my house with 2 police officers, and they assaulted me in front of him. Did he say anything while they attacked you? I asked. Yes, he said. This is what homewreckers deserve. Did you press charges? I inquired. No, they threatened to throw me in jail for 10 years on trumped-up charges if I did. The assistant DA objected again, claiming this testimony had no relevance, The judge nodded in agreement. Before she could sustain the objection, I argued that the assistant DA had opened the door to this testimony by stating in his opening argument that vigilant justice had no place in modern society. This revelation showed that he personally employed it. The judge thought for a moment, and then overruled the objection, recalling the jury and allowing my examination of Mr. Cochran. I had recalled that a similar tactic had been used in a Law and Order episode I had seen years earlier. Who needs law school when you have reruns? I continued. So what happened after that? That night, his wife came to my apartment with a black eye and 2 broken ribs, he started. She said he had beaten her. Objection. The DA yelled. Sustained, replied the judge. Now I was in my element. Mr. Cochran, did you see a black eye on the assistant DA's wife when she came to your house? Yes, he answered. Did you take her to the hospital for her injuries? He nodded. Your witness, counselor, I said, twirling a pencil between my fingers. No questions, the assistant DA replied. I tried to call my next witness, the DA's former wife, but the assistant DA asked to approach the bench. He didn't want her testimony on the record. The assistant DA agreed to drop all charges of assault and battery if I pled guilty to disturbing the peace and paid a $500 fine. I looked at the jury and declined his offer. I believed the jury was on my side, and I wanted his record of domestic violence on the record. The judge left the bench for a few minutes, then returned, stating we would take a 30-minute recess. When court resumed, the judge had a broad smile on her face. The assistant DA then told the judge he would drop all charges against me. The judge refused, wanting to hear the testimony from his ex-wife. An older silver-haired man entered the courtroom with a TV camera crew and 3 sheriffs. The judge smiled at him while the assistant DA nearly choked. His ex-wife testified about the abuse she had suffered, and she brought hospital records with her. The judge listened intently, and after she finished, she dropped all charges against me. The judge then asked the assistant DA's ex-wife if she would testify against her former husband. She declined, stating that a man with his power would destroy her. At that moment, the older man asked the judge for permission to speak. He introduced himself as the district attorney, which I already knew from his constant re-election commercials. I remember the newscasters saying he was behind 3% in the polls, with reporters claiming he would need a miracle to win re-election. The district attorney informed the assistant DA's wife that her ex would no longer be in office after today, so she was safe to testify. He faced the TV camera and, with the forced sincerity that all politicians possess, declared, I will never condone domestic violence or allow an alleged abuser to work in my office. Instead, I will personally prosecute him. One of the sheriffs handed the assistant DA some papers, handcuffed him, and led him away. The district attorney then turned to my wife and her boyfriend, stating, You forged this man's name and took his home and the money he earned for his daughter's college education, wasting it on an expensive sports car. He faced the camera again, his expression etched with anger. The sheriff handed my wife papers and handcuffed her, while the third sheriff did the same for her boyfriend. You two are under arrest for theft, forgery, bank fraud, and grand larceny. I realized he was smart, using my criminal case to bolster his re-election campaign. For once in my life, I had lucked out. I made a mental note to vote for him. Facing the TV camera next to me, the district attorney said that his office was passionately interested in justice. I knew I would see that statement, and my face repeated endlessly in his TV ads, so I applauded him. The judge looked sternly at me. Today you got a hall pass. Next time, you won't be so lucky. Your Honor, there will never be a next time, I replied, raising my right hand. That week, my wife was fired from her job, and the district attorney froze all her bank accounts and assets. She tried to reconcile with me, but I laughed in her face. Our children refused to speak with her ever again. 2 weeks later, the DA won re-election, and a week after that, I received an invitation to meet with him. He said I was the reason he was reelected and expressed gratitude, claiming I was a better investigator than 90% of his staff. He offered me a job as an investigator in his office, contingent on my passing a 6-month course in criminal law and procedure at the local community college. I would be working with an experienced investigator and earning a salary during that time. Given that my arthritis was making my career as a mechanic almost impossible, I immediately accepted. He also insisted that I attend a 3-hour anger management seminar. "I wish I had known you when my wife divorced me," he said with a wicked smile. He kept his word and personally prosecuted the former assistant DA for spousal abuse, who received a 2-year prison sentence alongside many convicts he had previously sent there. I heard he won the Miss Congeniality Award from his fellow inmates as a sort of signing bonus. The DA informed me that he had indicted my former wife and her boyfriend on various charges based on her theft of my watch, bank account, and home equity, which she had obtained by forging my signature. With all her funds frozen or returned to me, she had no means to hire a good lawyer. After paying for her bail, she was represented by a brand new public defender who needed help finding her way to the courthouse. My ex and her lover each received 5-year prison terms. My daughters and I never visited her, despite her weekly letters pleading for our attention. I sued my former wife's employer for intentional infliction of emotional distress, as they had condoned and encouraged her affair. Using her boss's testimony in my trial as evidence, I received $50,000, which I placed in my daughter's college fund, knowing that tuition costs were rising faster than I could save. The next 2 years brought me immense pride and joy, but also some sorrow and tears as I drove each of my daughters off to college, with 4 years of tuition safely in the bank, secure from my wife's grasp. I had devoted my adult life to raising 2 competent, independent girls, and I truly missed them. Before they left, they made me a color chart to help me match my pants with my shirts. Even with their chart, my color matching skills remained hit or miss. They also warned me that my choices in women were lacking and promised to pick out my next wife for me. I dutifully attended the anger management seminar where I met and began dating Selma. She had been ordered to attend after an altercation in which she knocked out the teeth of her ex-husband's girlfriend. This was a woman after my own heart. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.